All right.
Well, welcome everyone. Thank you guys for coming. My name is Sheen Gadamer. I work here at Steampunk, and thank you to Steampunk for letting us use the space. This is dcast meetup, and I'm one of the co-organizers. Cynthia is one of the others. The DC Agile software testing, which I actually had to look up today because we just call it dcast. But thank you very much for coming. Quick thing about Steampunk, we do federal consulting. We are always hiring, looking for testers, looking for cloud architects, designers, all sorts of stuff. That's it. That's my whole pitch. And so today we have Julie Wyman here talking to us. She's from Appian, and she's going to be talking to us about applying Agile to a trip to Antarctica. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me. So yeah, good to see everyone. It's nice to be back in person. This is my first meetup in person. I've been to just 2 conferences so far, but I really love meetups in the local area. I'm from Arlington, so from around here, it's nice to be getting back into the swing of meetups. As Jean said, this talk is really all about taking some tips and tricks that I pulled together on a trip a few years ago. At this point, it was definitely pre-pandemic, but on a trip to Antarctica that kind of reached into my Agile brain a little bit and got me thinking about kind of corollaries to the way I think about things at work and some things that I could pull from these non-work experiences. So it is just to be very clear and set expectations. If anyone got their pizza and now wants to slip out any of these conveniently located doors, is not testing focused at all. It is a very high level Agile focused talk, but it's really all about how you can take experiences from kind of outside traditional work experiences and really outside software development in general, but use them to kind of build up your empathy and build up how you kind of think about that in those actual work experiences. So again, as Jean mentioned, I work for Appian from around here and excited to get into it with you all. Also will say, I'm guessing that you all are pretty bought into Agile if you're participating in these meetups. So it's not really to go over the basics with you, but we'll cover them because again, it's trying to focus on how we're connecting these experiences to them so that you can hopefully think about how you might find some of your own experiences and be able to do the same going forward. There we go. All right, so if you're willing, optional, I have a Menti poll just to kind of get the juices flowing. Hopefully the pizza doesn't put us into too much of a food coma. So if you haven't used Menti before, it's just a way to do some interactive polling. So you can join it from any smartphone, any browser. Basically just pop a browser open and go to menti.com, or if you like QR codes, feel free to scan the QR code. If you do menti.com, then just enter the code 51639726, and then it's going to pop up the first question, and you can submit your answers. I'm going to switch to the screen just so you all can see it. But if you missed it, don't worry, it's still up at the top here. Again, that's just menti.com, and the code is still up here, 51639726. So just asking you to reflect. When you think about the word change, what adjectives or emotions come to mind? Seeing a few answers trickling already. I'll wait to see a few more.
I'm so sorry, menti.com.
Yep, it's www.menti.com. And then the code is 51639726. And if you have joined that, even if you've submitted your answers, go ahead and leave that tab open because we'll actually use it again for just a few more questions throughout the session. So thanks to everyone who's been submitting answers already. I see a few big ones standing out: hard, uncomfortable, resistance, chaos, but also learning, evolve, always challenge, adapt, painful, time, growth, stressful, tension, needed, unfamiliar, constant, disruption, overwhelming, exciting. So I find this is often the case, right? Like a lot of conflicting things, and just a lot of different things that might go along with it. And it's possible that sometimes maybe these come from different people, but also that one person might have submitted a lot of these different responses as well. All right, we're gonna do one more. So basically just asking you to do the same thing, but this time think about the word planning. So now if you're just reflecting on planning, what emotions or adjectives come to mind when you think about planning?
I already closed the tab.
You can rejoin.
Okay, but I don't have the code.
Say that again?
Does anyone know the code?
Oh, it's still at the top. Yep, it's 5163-9726.
I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, and it's a little small, so if you need me to repeat it, just let me know. Bless you. Being hard, necessary, organized, long-term, discipline, preparation, boring, takes time, stressful, that one showed up in the other one, brainstorm, not working, painful, incomplete, static, pivotal, slow, needed. So again, what always strikes me is that there's a lot of the same words that show up on both, and also a lot of contradictory things that it can spin up, sometimes within the same person, sometimes across groups. In any event, thank you for participating. It's helpful to me just to kind of see where people are at, and also just to kind of get us thinking about the topic. We will have one more mentee later, so if you still have it, feel free to leave it, and we'll come back to it. Let's flip back to the slides. Wants to play ball with me. There we go. So definitely there are no shortage of quotes out there about both the need for planning and the constancy of change. We see a lot of them. And what I think is interesting is that I think there's a common misconception out there sometimes with Agile that there's no need for planning, right? That Agile is just all about go with the flow. But obviously that's not the case, right? And in fact, we all know that there is guidance directly in the Agile Manifesto that speaks to it. There we go. So you know that's not the case. Here we go, right there, right smack dab in the Agile Manifesto, responding to change over following a plan. Okay, great, it's right there. What I find interesting is that I think a lot of times we just kind of focus on the main key pieces and we forget a little bit about this last, all right, go ahead and do this. Oh, the whole thing is slow. Moving on. Live in person, I was excited, now I'm just getting a little anxious here. You're along for the ride. Well, I don't know what's going on. Yeah, we are. Ooh, oh, you're getting a preview. No looking. There we go. Well, it didn't give you the answer, it just showed you the questions. That's okay. Is this last piece, right? Is that, you know, it right here is telling us that it's not really just about one of them, that it is about both, right? In the right amounts and at the right time, right? In the right way. So there's some balance needed. And it doesn't say anything about not making a plan. It just says not to keep following one that doesn't make sense anymore. And that resonates a lot with me, right? The need to balance both some planning and the ability to respond to change. There's a good part of my personality that likes to make a nice little checklist and then is ready to march out and check off those items. Feels a good amount of satisfaction with checking them off. But I also know, just through plenty of failed attempts at trying to get that perfect planning and not being able to accomplish it, that there is no planning that you can do perfectly enough that's going to prevent you from every once in a while just going ahead and taking a face plant. And that when that happens, you have to be able to find a way to just pick yourself up and find a different path forward, right? So hopefully if we plan well, then there's a way that we can still get back on track and accomplish our original intent, but maybe just in a different way than we had originally envisioned. So to me, that's kind of how I think about planning in an Agile context. That it does change. It's not maybe the same big, upfront, super detailed planning that sometimes I know my customers go in expecting. It is a little bit more about this just enough approach, right? And when I say just enough, I mean that we're planning in much more detail for those shorter time horizons, right? What's right in front of us, we have more detail for, and we stay to the higher level for those things that are further out, right? And so then if we're able to do that, then we still have that clarity, and planning at that level has a lot of value. To me, when we plan in that way, we can still have really good collaborative discussions amongst the team that generate great insights and new thoughts that we wouldn't have if we didn't go through that actual active planning. We can have better insights into our actual goal across the whole team, and that itself has value, right? More understanding, and we have a clear goal that we're marching towards. And it's okay if that goal is going to change, right? Because we don't expect that it won't. So we know that we're going to have to be a little bit flexible, but hopefully we can modify our approach and still keep that overall goal in mind. So I think about it somewhat in terms of like when we do release planning, right? We set an overarching vision of some business objective that we're hoping to achieve. But the exact specifications of the nitty-gritty user stories that we might have to actually do to accomplish that are very up for debate, right? Like halfway through, we may realize we don't need this one. Some of that, how we actually end up getting there, can change, but we're still working towards trying to get to this higher level goal, right? So how we get there may change, but the overarching goal remains the same and provides us some direction. Similar to how the product owner is often describing the what, but not the how. So I really like, there's a concept that I came across, I think from the military, called commander's intent, right? It's basically the description of a successful outcome, right? It basically tells them, like, at the end of this endeavor, this is the outcome we're trying to achieve, but it gives a lot of leeway for improvisation so that the team in the field can adapt if they need to still try to accomplish that end goal however they best see fit. All right, so needing to do all those things, yes, plan, and yes, also adapt, is super true in the context of Antarctica. I'm going to try to just share some examples to tie it all together, give you that context, and then along the way, call out what were some of my key takeaways from that non-work experience, but how they helped me kind of tie it back to these overall concepts of change, planning, and empathy. All right, so in Antarctica, there's a ton of planning, and as soon as we arrived, I mean literally like boarded, drop your bag off, sit down, and then they told you all the reasons why there was a lot of planning and a lot of change. And the plans had to do with environmental regulations, passenger safety, and just the nature of where we are. So I'm going to go through some of those.
Julie,
Yep.
quick question, please. Just as a little bit background context, was this a work-related trip, just a fun trip you were taking?
Yes, it was a for fun trip.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
What time of year was it?
It was in January.
Yeah.
Yep. So January is their summer, which is the only time that you can really go. There's like a very brief time period when you can actually go. I mean, if you're not like there for a scientific expedition where some people are there like all year round at bases, like more on the continent. But this, we were on a boat, as you'll see as I get into it. And yeah, there's kind of like a December to February couple month time period where you can kind of do that if you're more there as a tourist. So we are remote. So the way we got there is you can basically take a boat from usually Argentina all the way to Antarctica. We took a plane, and this will come back into importance due to motion sickness reasons for myself and my mother. So we flew from Punta Arenas, Chile, and then boarded the boat right about here, and then we kind of cruised around and then got to explore Antarctica. But in any event, it makes it seem kind of close when you look at it on this map. It's not. You are very remote. There's nothing by you when you land. There's just like a tiny little gravel runway. There's nothing else there. There's no running back to Walgreens, CVS. There's no, urgent clinic. So you really want to make sure that you're minimizing, especially any medical emergencies, because you're in a highly remote location. There's also, and this was pretty new to me, a ton of planning that goes into environmental protection. So Antarctica is really its own continent, but there's a lot of agreements basically across lots of countries to observe these environmental regulations. This has to do with like when we're on the continent, keeping a certain distance from the animals. You're excited to see them, but you have to keep a certain distance. When you're walking along, if you make a certain hole in the snow, you actually want to make sure to kind of like fill it in. You don't want a little baby penguin to fall into it and not actually be able to get out of it. That could happen. Who wants to kill a baby penguin? Nobody. You don't want to do that. What else? So when you're leaving the ship, you actually have to like step in this solution to disinfect your boots, because it's actually really important to make sure that we're not introducing new organisms onto the continent. So there's a lot of planning. Like this doesn't just happen. There's a lot of thought that goes into making sure that Antarctica stays kind of the remote seventh wilderness continent that it is. Passenger safety, it's also really important if you're going to take a whole bunch of people that don't really know what they're doing out to explore Antarctica, that there's planning behind it. So this was Portal Point. It was our first continental landing. We were super excited. We're like, yes, we made it. We're in Antarctica. It looks beautiful, pristine snow. All of this pristine snow is also covering super deep crevices, and you can't see them, you don't know where they are, so you can't just go wandering. You need to trust the guides that have done very in-depth planning and laid out, you can barely see them, but these tiny little flags tell us where to walk and only where to walk. And as someone who stepped, I don't know, I'm telling you, 1 foot off the path just because I wanted to finish taking a photo and let someone pass behind me, I ended up to my thigh in snow. It's like that. It wasn't a crevice, but it's just very easy to fall into the snow. So you want to stay on the well-trodden path. And just overall, a lot of planning goes into passenger experience. Now, again, part of this is for safety. So we took these little pontoon boats every time we went from the big, basically cruise ship that we were staying on to get to the landing. But every time you kind of transfer from the ship onto one of these, it's a little rocky, you have to be careful, so they taught us how to do that safely. Also, every time we went to see this beautiful ice, they knew exactly how close you could get, so you could get those amazing photos, but not too close, because if a chunk of this falls off, it can create a pretty big wave, and that could flip the boat if you're too close. So there's a lot of planning that goes into safety, but it's not just the negative, scary stuff. It's also the passenger experience that made it an unforgettable trip. They know all the best spots, they know the best time, they know the best sequencing. So a lot went into sequencing things to make it a really good and positive experience.
Yep. Also, another slightly off topic. Are these your own photos or sort of stock photos of the
Oh no. These are all real photos.
Photos?
Yeah,
Oh, cool.
from this trip.
Oh,
Yeah.
nice.
Oh yeah, for sure. This is all real. This is a real. So every day they put together an itinerary for us. So you can see a pretty detailed itinerary for the day. So when I say they did detailed planning, they did detailed planning every day to the hour, like where we were going to be, what we were going to be trying to do. It's also pretty important when you're responsible for 100 or so passengers to know how they're all going to get off the ship so they don't all bottleneck at the same time. So we had these disembarkation groups, so they also had a sign in and sign out sheet to try to make sure that we didn't lose anyone along the way. So again, just lots of planning that went into making it an effective and smooth running trip. Finally, like I said, we're remote. You can't go back and buy anything at Target that you might have forgotten, so you need to prepare and you need to bring all the right gear with you. And you might think, well, it's cold, just like lots of the same type of stuff. But actually, when we were there, like I said, it was their summer. There were pretty variable conditions. There was one day that we were out there on the deck and they were playing reggae music and it was hot and we were having a barbecue and you could basically be in short sleeves. I mean, it wasn't like hot, but it was not freezing cold. And there were other days that you were like wearing every single layer you had because it was cold. So you basically had to be prepared for changing conditions. And part of this was if you had the right layers, then in the moment you were more prepared for the change that might come. So that's just my brother getting ready to kayak. He had some specialized gear, so he had to be ready for that. But what I really want to call out is this yellow jacket that my aunt is wearing. They gave us, so most of it you had to bring, but they gave us these jackets. Part of it is they wanted to make sure you actually had a good one. It had like an insulated layer on the inside you could take out. But more than that, it was actually designed to anticipate some of the changing weather conditions and what that behavior might bring and what behavior that might bring from you. So they know that it can actually get kind of warm and that like the combination of it being maybe just actually like 30 degrees and you're out there like huffing it up a mountain to get a good view and you're actually kind of hot, you might actually want to take this jacket off, as crazy as it seems. And so they've seen people do that and then just like toss it on the ground and be like, I'll get it on the way back to the boat. But when you do that and you don't really pay attention to where you're tossing it on penguin poop. Now when you then bring that jacket back and hang it in your tiny little cabin on the ship, stinks the whole thing up. So they designed these jackets so that if you flip them inside out, there were actually straps on the inside that you could basically then flip it and wear it, carry it as like a backpack. So you could basically have it off of you, but like be carrying it on your back so you didn't have to put it down. So again, that's just like a planned design that made it easier to then respond to the changing temperature. So, brings me to my first trip takeaway. Planning is still necessary. We would not have even like made it onto the trip if they didn't do planning. Because when we got there, to even get us there, they divided up all the passengers onto 2 flights to get us there. This was not because by the number of people, we would have all fit on one flight. But by the weight of the plane with all of our stuff, if they had put us all on one plane, the plane would have skidded off the runway because the runway was that short. So there's a lot of planning to make sure that in those conditions we can be safe and we can succeed. Planning is still necessary. And the right planning can actually make it easier to then respond to change, like those weather conditions or some other factors. Because responding to change was absolutely going to happen. In that same first briefing, when the expedition leader said, okay, by the way, here's our plan, we'll give you a schedule every day. She also said, by the way, we'll usually post an updated schedule at noon, and we'll also give updated briefings over the intercom when things change, and things are gonna change all the time, so don't get attached to the plans. And they told us, though, they set expectations about why things would change and the process that they would use when they had to make those changes. So they did a really great job at setting expectations because there were a ton of forces that were outside of the team's control. These were things like weather, fog, wave surges, near hurricane force winds, but also just other new information like military exercises that were going on nearby or animal sightings, all things that would make it so that we would want to respond to change. Because clearly, these conditions could make you have to have very different plans for your day. Sometimes it was crystal clear, no wind, as blue as can be, and other days, super cold, very snowy. So we have to be prepared for that. So again, this is the exact same daily briefing that I showed you before, but there were actually some clues baked right into it to kind of set those expectations. They said, we hope to land. This will be our first attempt at landing on the continent. We aim to Zodiac cruise. We hope. So again, all about that expectation setting right up front, being very clear. This is a plan, but don't get too attached to it, please. They did a really good job at this. This was one of the things that I was impressed by. They did a better job than I think we often do, like when we share estimates, and I know that my customer instantly is like, oh, estimate? Great, I got it locked in. We'll count on that, thank you. Because again, these trails that they laid out for us, like sometimes they did this trip back to back. And just the trail that they had laid out the week before, they couldn't even count on that being the trail that they could use when they brought us, right? They had to validate, they had to adjust. It's constantly changing and they had to be ready for that. So takeaway number 3, set expectations early and often. It was a really key part of being able to set expectations about what the planning meant and preparing people for responding to the change more effectively. All right, so I'm gonna walk you through just like one average day in Antarctica. So every day we had a daily goal. Like I said, kind of, like usually we're working towards some type of goal at work. On every day of the trip, we had some sort of overarching goal that we were trying to achieve. In this particular case, our goal was to see a colony of Gen 2 penguins. So, just to make sure you leave with a good varied amount of knowledge, we're gonna flip back to Menti, do one final quiz. This one is to see if you can find which one is the Gen 2 penguin. So it's the same, if you need to rejoin it, it's still just menti.com. 5163-9726. If you're in it already, it should refresh for you. And you're just guessing if the Gen 2 is penguin A, B, or C. Okay, most people got a chance to vote. Ooh, we got a few votes for everyone. So every penguin got some votes. Looks like A and B are most in the running, but B definitely is the one that got the votes here. Go ahead and reveal. So some people knew they were penguins. It was A. So A, who knew they're penguins? No. A few people did. You didn't know? Well, now you do. So at least you can leave with one little factoid. Maybe it'll help you in trivia one day. So the Gen 2 has the little orange on its beak. The chin strap, once you knew the name, that would probably have helped you. It has this nice little strap there, and then the belly penguin has a fully black head and beak. So, but in this particular day, again, our goal was to see a colony of Gen 2 penguins. So they usually briefed us on that daily goal the night before. So they gather everyone, they say, okay, this is the high-level plan for the next day. It was based on all of the expedition team's in-depth knowledge. They know the sites, they know the weather conditions, they have, again, done this trip before. They've scouted, they also have communication between different boats, so they have a good sense, they have a lot of information. They shared the plan. That was plan A, that's what we'll call it. All right, go to bed. As we wake up the next day, announcement, wake up call, okay, we're just running, the currents were a little whatever, we're just slightly behind. No big deal, we're just gonna be like docking about half an hour late, so basically just adjust your planned disembarkation times every group by half an hour. That's plan B. Just slightly adjust, same goal, just slightly adjust your times. That's pretty normal, lots of adjustments. Go up in the dining hall, eating, breakfast, plan C. All right, so their little advance team from the crew went to check out our landing site, super high wave surge. That's dangerous because again, we have to get from the big ship to actually land from these pontoon boats, but now you actually have to get out of the pontoon boats like gracefully, kind of, and then like get onto the beach and like walk away. And if there's like high wave surge, dangerous, again, don't want to get hurt, don't want to try to get medevaced. So they're like, no, you can't do this. So now we have a new plan. We're just gonna have to like try to go around the corner of the peninsula, different landing site. So a little bit of a bigger shift at this point, but still still meeting our goal of trying to see the Gentoo penguins. So a little bit more of a delay, but we think it's still gonna work. Did that. And again, so my fourth takeaway is try to keep that goal in mind and just adapt the approach. So still use that goal as the anchor and see if you can adapt the approach, the actual how, the means that you're taking to get there. So we do that. Success! Found the colony of Gentoo penguins. Really nice day, safe landing spot, super fun. Got a chance to walk up and see them way more up close. That was cool. Go ahead and see if this one will play. What's more fun than seeing penguins waddle around? Yeah, super cool. So these were our trails. They are allowed to walk on our trails. We're just not allowed to walk on their trails. I kind of expected that they walk like that. I didn't know that sometimes they like to cruise around like this. I mean, again, like, who doesn't like a shortcut sometimes? It's easier. Sometimes you're in that mood. So that was cool. I felt like I learned something. Then after we saw the colony, part of the rest of our day was to say, okay, before we go back to the ship, before we go back and have lunch, we had a planned little Zodiac cruise. So sometimes we did that, right? We just went out and we did a little Zodiac cruise, and usually the goal was just to like see the pretty ice, kind of see a little bit more of the surrounding area. So we did that, we were cruising around, and then towards the very end of our planned Zodiac cruise, a little bit off in the distance, one person spotted something and they're like, is that a whale tail? And yes, it was a whale tail. And so they spotted it. And based on that, we were able to say like, let's see if we can get closer because it's super cool. We knew where the whales were and we had an opportunity to do that. So in this case, we were able to go and see it. And we didn't really give up much because we had actually like seen the Gentoos, and all we were doing is maybe getting to lunch a little late, and we weren't even gonna miss lunch. Like, it's totally fine. So it was just kind of like a bonus for us. But sometimes this type of thing would happen, and it could have happened like on our way to going to see the Gentoos. And at that point, like the group would have had to make a decision. Like, I don't know, should we go see the Gentoos or should we see the whales? Because like at this point, now we know where the whales are. We don't always know where the whales are. And so sometimes in that case, it is actually worth, right, forgoing our original plan. If something exciting enough, spectacular enough comes up, then it might actually be worth changing the original plan based on this really new information. So usually in my work situations, we're not doing that, right? We're usually keeping the goal in mind and just adapting the approach. But every once in a while, like, wholesale market conditions change, and we actually do need to change the overall goal, and that would be a bigger change like this to take advantage of new circumstances. There's actually another famous Antarctic example of having to change your goal. I don't know if anyone's familiar with Ernest Shackleton. I see a few head nods, and his voyage on the vessel Endurance. So for those of you who aren't, so Shackleton set out with an intent pretty lofty to traverse the Antarctic continent starting from the side of the Weddell Sea. So they set out and they were going along, and at some point as they were trying to get there, the ship got stuck in ice. And so at that point they said, oh, bummer, this stinks. But sometimes that happens, and actually sometimes you can write it out. So originally they said, that's all right, but we will keep our goal in mind and we will try to adapt our approach, which means we'll adapt our timeline. We're gonna have to like just float with the ice. So usually you try to float with the ice, wait for it to melt or kind of leave, and then we'll adjust and we'll kind of get back on course and we'll continue on. So that's what they tried originally. Well, they were not so lucky. Eventually the ice solidified enough around their ship that it actually cracked the hull. So, okay, this is no longer a plan, so now we actually have to change our whole goal, and the goal changes to the actual just pure survival of the crew. It was not easy, it actually took multiple attempts, but at the end, they were actually able to save the entire crew, which is pretty amazing, and at that point was way more significant than the original goal itself, right? Just fun fact update. So the ship eventually sank, Now, however, just recently, they found it. It's been preserved 10,000 feet in this freezing cold Antarctic water, and since 1915, I think, when it sank. And so they just found it. It's actually in really good shape. So National Geographic had a whole article on it, so kind of fun. If you're interested, see that there. But basically, this all leads to the fifth takeaway, which is when circumstances truly necessitate it, do change the goal. Don't just plod along to something that doesn't make sense anymore. And what's interesting for me is when I first kind of put this together, when I was first reflecting on the experience, it was pre-COVID. And I came up with this one. I thought, yeah, there are times that this will apply, but I didn't think it was that common. I thought, more of the time we're doing this, and sometimes we'll do this. And then living through a pandemic, there's a lot more opportunities where this actually came into play because we've just had to live through it more often. So just personal experience of experiencing that. So good to at least keep both in mind. All right, so final and most important takeaway, empathy is the key. As we're going through all this, yep, we need to plan, yep, we're gonna experience change, but in both aspects of it, empathy is really the piece that's going to be the most important when it comes to how we experience that change. And for me, even though like change, it wasn't an option, right? If you're in Antarctica, they're going to change the plan on you. They're going to announce all these different plans, but it's not necessarily comfortable. You can see a lot of different personality types for the folks on the trip. And so actually seeing that and seeing different people's reactions and then experiencing some of my own, as I'll share in this last story, it helped me really leave with a lot more empathy for some of my own team members when they're struggling with dynamic situations. So this is January 7th. This is the day that we were supposed to be leaving to come home. So they had us pack up our cabins. We had to leave them because they were supposed to be cleaning them, turning them over, because we were supposed to leave this day. And then basically like on the same plane that was bringing new passengers, that was then gonna pick us up and bring us home. So we were out of the cabins, they were turning them over. We were hanging out all day in this, big room, waiting, and just, hanging out, watching some shows. Okay, no big deal. Waiting, it was taking a little while, but they're just waiting for a weather window, and that usually is pretty common. Again, you just need to find that in Antarctica. Makes sense. But finally, they called us down, disembarkation group, took the goodbye selfie on the stairs. We're like, great, been a great trip, time to go home. All right, excited. Well, we got all the way to where the runway started, and then we're told, yeah, the plane turned around. So the thing is, the plane did leave, and it made it about halfway, and then it saw these clouds, this nice little fog that had just come in, settled, and was just not going anywhere. So it had left, it thought it was gonna be okay, it thought it had a window, left with the best of intentions, it just wasn't gonna be safe, it had to turn around. So we had to turn around and head straight back for the ship. All right, I mean, it's safety, what can you do? This is Antarctica, it sometimes happens, we understand. Spirits are relatively high. They're like, this happens, we'll try again tomorrow. Don't worry, go back to your, bumps, like, cool. Spirits are high. But the next day we didn't go anywhere either. Wasn't hard to see why. Look out the window, that's all you see. Now luckily, we weren't gonna lose out on any food. They had extra supplies. We were actually starting to feel pretty bad for the folks who were supposed to be coming on the next trip, because after a few days, their trip gets canceled. And we knew from our own experience, this is a trip that you plan a year in advance. Now luckily, they require you to get trip insurance. Now again, good example of planning ahead that makes it easier to respond to change later, but still that stinks, right? Empathy for that disappointment. Okay, so feeling bad for them, a little bad for us, worse for them, waiting it out, see what happens. But a few days keep going, and we're still in Antarctica. I'm sending an email on the ship's emergency Wi-Fi system to my boss, I don't know, stuck in Antarctica, TBD, I'll let you know when I know. We're like cruising around, we're getting like some extra little, expeditions to see things, but kind of having to stay close by. And we're just feeling it out. At this point, this is like beyond normal. They're like, yeah, this is like outside of our just like normal wiggle room, but we gotta wait it out. Like, it's not in our control. We can't just force the situation. Okay, a few more days go by. Look at that, the sun, like it looks great. We're thinking like, well, for sure now we're gonna get to go. Like, this is exciting, right? Like, it's a good day. They're gonna let us go. And we were excited because honestly, up until this point, I had been getting really nervous. I think I told you all before, I picked the fly trip because I get really, really bad motion sickness. And there had started to be talk that if we didn't get to fly back pretty soon, it was on the table that they were just going to have us take the boat back because we couldn't wait indefinitely. And so they're like, well, whether we fly back or not isn't in the ship's control, but whether we take the ship back or not is. And so at some point they set a deadline. Okay, by midnight tomorrow, if we don't fly back, we're taking this ship and we're sailing it back to Argentina. Now remember, we left from Chile, so that creates a few logistical questions for some of us, but still, that's what they were going to do, because eventually the ship needed to be back, there were future trips, people needed to be back for their jobs, some people were gonna start running out of important medications, there were just like considerations, we couldn't let this go on indefinitely. So even though that was stressful, because there were some of us who had real anxiety about that, they managed it the absolute best that they could. They kind of knew who was nervous about it. They actually reached out to us proactively, sat us down like individually, let us know in advance of like a big announcement that, hey, this might happen. They actually let us talk to the ship's captain and the doctor just to like try to ease any of your concerns. So even in like a hard situation, they managed it proactively and the best they could with setting expectations. But that's basically what was on the table. So again, we were supposed to leave on January 7th, just kidding. Had a lot of days where we got some extra playing around time. And then eventually, finally, literally just before our midnight deadline at 11:30 p.m., 6 days later, on January 13th, we actually made it out and were able to fly back to Punta Arenas, Chile. So we just made it, we just squeaked out in time, but this whole part of it really helped me to kind of reshape my thinking about just like when people are struggling and to give them a little bit more space, right? Because throughout the whole process, I sort of knew like they didn't really have any other choices. They were making decisions for really sound reasons, but you sometimes still just need a little bit of time and space to sit with that information. So I try to actually remember and sit in this moment when I'm like, meeting with a team member and it's like, what don't you get about it? Like, we don't really have a choice here. We have to do this. And just like give them a little bit extra space to like process it, think about it, and let it soak in. So that's one of the things that it helps me kind of channel. It also helps me reframe how I think about kind of our changes in a work environment. Because when you're in this environment, it just felt like everything was a little bit of chaos, like it's part of the environment. So these changes didn't feel like a failure in planning. They felt like, well, it's just the environment. But oftentimes in work, it feels like when things go wrong, it's like, well, we could have planned that better. If only we had done this. And sometimes there are things that we can retrospect and learn from, but a lot of times there are things that are going to happen. We can't anticipate everything, right? And so it helps me reframe so that not everything is a failure in planning, and some of it is just the factor of our fast-paced environments and being able to anticipate that we're going to have to adjust to a certain amount of change. So that's all kind of where I'm at with it. And then finally, I think what's important is it helped me to really kind of place the empathy on the person, because the person is who's experiencing the change. Like sometimes I think I used to try to plan for the change, or like what was the change that's happening. but really now I focus more on the people, right? Because the people are the ones who are actually experiencing it. But what I do focus on is what can we control? And it's not actually the change itself, but it's a lot of the messaging and the communication around it, right? It's the communication and the expectation setting. So those are two pieces that are within my control. And so I try to focus on them because they often do have a really big impact on how the change lands on someone. So that's really the last takeaway, which is to really just keep empathy at the forefront. So again, just kind of bringing it all together and giving a shout out credit to Jill Morrison. He did this little sketch note for me a while back. This little visual. But it's all those pieces together that allow you to maximize the positive experiences, right? It's not just the negative, but it's the positive. It's seeing the baby penguins, seeing all the ice, seeing humongous colonies of these chin straps. This is a, this is, yeah, I think so, yes. Yep, a leopard seal, and then those humpback whales nice and up close. But really, it's that balance, right? Like planning wouldn't have gotten us all the way here, right? Like we had to be able to respond to change, to seize some of these moments. And yes, it kept us safe, but it also really maximized these positive experiences. So that's it. This is me. I'm always happy to connect. If you have any questions about the talk, if you want to go there, I'm happy to share information. But I'm not pitching it. I'm not selling any trips. Sometimes people have questions, and I'm happy to answer those. But that's me.
So would you ever go back?
Would I ever go back? Well, so I mean, it was a great trip. But it's also like there's only so much you can do, because really it's like you're on the ship, and then it's like it's very controlled when you're able to like go out. Like, well, and so I mean, it's like when you are out kind of exploring, it's like they're taking you out, and when you're out like on land, same thing. It's like you kind of are out for little pieces of a time, and so. I mean, I would be more interested to kind of explore maybe like some similar areas, but in the north, so like the Arctic. So like I haven't been to like the Arctic Circle, so I'd be more interested to like go there before I would go back to Antarctica. But I mean, it was really great. I mean, we were lucky, like we had really good weather, so like it wasn't like, in terms of our daily goals, and because we were there a little bit longer than planned, we were able to like check off like pretty much the big things that we want to be able to do. Like every once in a while, like it is variable. Like you don't always get to control which animals you're able to see, and sometimes you don't get to all of the spots you want to go to. So like, I think there could be situations where you maybe would want to, but I still have zero desire to cross the Drake Passage. So if you do the trip on the ship, then that's what you're doing, is you're crossing the Drake Passage, which is this like big stretch of really open water, which is like extremely rough. I have no, like my brother might be interested in doing that. I think he would have if like wasn't going with me. I have no interest in doing that. So I think for me, like just because I like to see so many places, I would probably go to some places I haven't been before I'd go back. But I definitely was happy to have been.
Okay, two questions. So Drake Passage is like rougher than your normal seaways.
Oh yeah. No, it's like, I mean, so like, I mean, I get like car sick normally. Like I have Dramamine in like literally every bag that I own. But like people that like don't, people that like worked on the ship, that were like on the expedition team, like, I mean, they like would get seasick like at least the first time, or like maybe like multiple times, that like when you're crossing the Drake Passage. That's like, yeah, like talking like big like rocking. But I mean, there was a time that when I said like near hurricane force winds, like that wasn't a joke. Like we were in, I don't know where we were. We were actually just anchored somewhere when they weren't expecting it. So if like you're really expecting a lot of winds, like you wouldn't be anchored, because you need to be able to like move and like kind of float with it. but like some winds came up really strong that they weren't expecting. We were anchored, and so actually it like blew us, but we were anchored, so it kind of like tilted us, and like a whole bunch of like books went like flying from the library shelves. I think I was in the library, like people that were in the dining hall, like a bunch of stuff went like flying. But then there was like a big storm, so obviously then they like pulled up the anchor. It wasn't like quite as drastic, but like I have some videos where it's like you can just see like it like howling and like kind of rocking, but it wasn't like that. Obviously most of the time you saw it was like pretty calm. Yeah.
There was two things that you mentioned that brought the idea of test plans to mind.
Sure.
One is that where somebody said that while plans might be useless, planning is
Indispensable.
very
Yeah.
important. And the other was that in the manifesto where it said something about
I can go back to it.
planning and adapting for your willingness to change. I can't remember exactly what it was. Yeah, okay. You're responding to change over following the plan. In more recent years, many projects that I've been on, bring up the idea of a test plan, people poo-poo that, and don't need test plans in Agile projects, it doesn't make sense. But I always push for a test plan, just for those reasons that we're talking about here, knowing that, man, stick to a test plan, but going through the planning and thinking process is really valuable. And so even if, folks on the project might be poo-pooing it, I think it's a good idea, and I often do one, whether people want one or not. If nothing else, it helps me, if I'm leading a team to, the test team to think through what's needed and think through risks, discuss risks, even if no one else wants to talk about project risks.
Yeah.
So
No.
I know not everyone here is in testing, but I know some of us, like me, are. And so that comes to mind.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
Or in terms of how you do this. So I feel like everything that you said is like also what I do. That's just a different thing. But
Yeah.
I feel like the hardest thing I have to do, like, especially if I'm such like ambitious, is that conflict between I can't be always promised, right? That's helps me for Agile. It's like the price I call, like do our best minutes, but push me for any more information I can't do. And that doesn't always get out of mind, right? Like people want to hear numbers, people want to hear like very specific details of so what are some tips that you might have to try if you like hitting that, hitting that sort of wall? People asking for much more. People really only use it to concrete details because you don't have that information to get how do you try to balance, how do you like walk that spectrum?
Yeah, no, I mean, definitely feel like I've been there in plenty of situations. I mean, I think part of it would be like the level of planning, right? So like, are they asking for like, like the commitment and the detailed planning for things that are like really far out, or are they talking about,
Yeah, that's that.
yeah, so I mean, I think like, then that's where it is, trying to, kind of talk about like, what's reasonable, like, what are our shared goals, like, when we do this, like, how accurate is it, right? And so it's like, we have these shared goals, right? Like, I'm not trying to provide like a false sense of security. What I want to do is like, provide something that's more meaningful. So like, when we plan at this like shorter time horizon, that's where I can give you this thing that you're talking about. But like when we're planning at this horizon, like maybe like providing an alternative, like I can't give you this, but here's what I would feel comfortable giving you, and here's when I would feel comfortable giving you this other thing that you're asking for. Because it's, like you said, it's kind of like a negotiation, a little bit of a dance, trying to get to a point where you kind of see that your intentions are working towards like a positive and same overall outcome. But like, I'm with you, like sometimes people want what they want and it doesn't make for a smooth conversation, but I think trying to be, clear and upfront about what's realistic and make it more of like a partnership.
would have taken for the ship to get to Argentina if you were to go back by ship, you know?
Yeah, I don't remember. This was a few years ago at this point, and I think that was like my worst case outcome. So I probably like blocked it out a little bit. But it's not like a few hours. Like I think it's on the order of magnitude of a few days. Like at least like 2 days. Yeah, I mean like this isn't like take a 2-hour nap, like get through it, like you're okay. Like
It's not a ferry ride.
No. It's like I think it's at least like 2 days or so. I don't know that like the whole time is as like rough, you know, like there might be a portion of it that is like rougher than the rest, but it's not like just a few hours.
And so it would have been the rough passing. So that was the rough passing.
Oh no. Like so no, we flew there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we didn't have to do the crossing, but if you do, then it's pretty rough.
How was the plane ride? How long was it?
The plane ride is only a few hours.
Oh. Was there a lot of turbulence because of where you were geographically?
I don't remember. It wasn't like, I don't remember it being like a super bad plane ride. I mean, it was like delayed. Like it delayed getting there, not as delayed as leaving, but like again, it's like, it's really more like it's more visibility. The runway is super, super short and it's gravel, but mostly it's super short. So they just like really have to be able to see it. And actually the one thing that I didn't mention, that day that it was sunny, actually the reason I forgot to mention why it was so in doubt was, so it was sunny, and so you'd think like, oh okay, we're definitely getting out today. But actually the reason why it was all in question was that it had gotten like not cloudy, the clouds had lifted, but with the warmer, the sun came out, it had started to melt some ice, and then the temps had dropped and it had frozen. So it had actually created some ice on the runway. So that was actually what was creating. So like we're all looking out there, we're thinking, no fog, like great, like time to go. And they're like, no, we don't know if we can land. So it was just like none of it was in our control, and it was like ever evolving. But yeah.
What did you feel on those days when you were marooned in there? Like you mentioned you did some like extra little trips or something?
I mean, like the first day, we just stayed on the ship because they thought we were leaving. Like the first day it was like movies, because it was like stay really close, like we think you're gonna get out. But the second day that like we hadn't left, same thing. But then like by the third day, it was like, yeah, you're not leaving, but like we're not leaving the general area. So we did like sort of like little like local, like little trips, just kind of like in that bay. Some of them were just like to see some like extra wildlife around there. There's actually like, so right in that area, it's some of those little islands that are just off the actual like main continent. And there's actually some like, I don't know if they're really like, I guess maybe like bases. They're kind of like outposts. Like a few different countries have them. So actually there were like field trips. If you wanted to go on them, you could get your like passport stamped by, I think like Poland had one, I think Russia had one, somebody else had one. Like there were like a few different like outposts that you could, and they had like also like souvenirs there. So it's like they were like trying to keep us entertained. They did a karaoke night. Like they were really like, they were having to scrape, I think, the bottom of their expedition team like notebook of like, what do you do when you're stuck with these people for this long? But mostly we just did like a few extra trips like locally. And then I think at some point we actually did pull up anchor, and actually like when they knew like the fog was settled, I think we like went a little bit further away, but not like too far.
You mentioned like the plane, and then there's the ship where you like stayed, which so where I'm just curious, where did the plane land, and how did you get to the ship? Was there like a little port area or something, or?
I mean, there's nothing. You land, they land the plane on this gravel runway, and then I think you have to walk like, I'm gonna say like 2 kilometers maybe on gravel, basically to like where the water's edge is, and that's where the pontoon boats pick you up, and then the pontoon boats like just like ferry you out to the ship, and that's how you get to it. But there's no like big like port or big like dock area. Like that's pretty much it.
Gotcha. Was that gravel landing space? Was that on Antarctica, or is that like one of the islands?
Yeah, it's like it's more in one of these like outer islands.
Oh,
up here.
okay, gotcha.
Yeah, and then you get on the ship, and that's why I was saying, so like some of what you're seeing is like up in some of these like outer islands, which there's like a lot of cool stuff around there. I mean, like a lot of what we saw was in some of this area too. And then like when I said we were at Portal Point, I don't remember where it was anymore, but like then that's when we got to our like first continental landing, wherever at whatever point that was, not on these like outer islands, but actually getting onto the continent. Yeah.
Can you give me a few more examples of when so outside of the whale showing up, like times when the crew have to actually consult the tourists on what they want to do?
Well, I mean, so most of the time they didn't. And to be clear, like there was actually a question. So when this whole thing came up about we're stuck, what are we gonna do? Like there were some questions like who gets to decide? Like do we all vote? And they were very clear, like, no, like, this isn't just like a free-for-all, like, you all aren't deciding, like, we will ultimately decide. And that's why I said, like, they were at least, like, very clear in terms of, like, how the decisions were gonna be made, like, how they would convey that, like, I mean, for the most part, like, they're the experts, they're running the trips, and they more or less are, like, designing what they think is best and what's safe. It's, like, that is really probably, like, one of the few examples where it's, like, we had a little bit of flexibility because it's just like we could kind of spend a little more time doing this or we could do that, and it's up to you. You personally had a lot of flexibility in terms of like, did you stay on the ship? Did you go on this expedition this afternoon? Or you could pick between certain things. But once you were doing it, like it wasn't like they got to get outvoted. But they were pretty clear about how those decisions got made.
Very much. So Julie gave her contact information. Also, if you're part of the meetup, we are always looking for ideas, whether you have people that you know that would like to speak or topics you'd like us to cover, please feel free to reach out. Steampunk is very generous about giving us the space. If I can find speakers, we can do this more often. So thank you all for coming. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having an in-person meetup once again.